Hello and welcome to session number 14. Look, I do apologize for the short break, but there's a reason that prevented me from being able to do sessions, for about a week. Everything will be put back a little bit, you're not going to lose anything. And this session about organic matter measurement in the soil, something you can do. I'm going to also put it off because, this keeps changing as we go. And I think that all of that practical side of things, including field inspections, we'll leave it till the end. We're just talking about theoretical stuff today, not today, for a while. But it's all important because remember this whole thing is about growing food for nutrition. This is not a gardening course. Okay, so I've got to make a few reminders here and remind you of this nitrogen cycle, because today we're talking about nitrogen. We're talking about nitrogen not as an essential element as such, because we've spoken about that before when we discussed the different elements of the nitrogen cycle. But I'm going to talk about nitrogen from the perspective of how to get it into the soil. Okay, so according to the natural, just a reminder here, according to the natural nitrogen cycle, nitrogen gets into the soil from the air by means of precipitation when there's thunderstorm. So the electric current and the heat it produces will force nitrogen and oxygen to combine, forming nitric oxide. This will dissolve in water and fall down in rain. The other component comes from bacteria, nitrogen-fixing bacteria, which are either free roaming in the soil or they live in symbiosis with the root, as in the case of legumes, as we shall talk about later on, not necessarily today. Okay, so these are the main two contributors to nitrogen entering the soil system. And then with the cycle, it goes out by different ways. But let's just worry about the input side of it here. Now, this component of adding nitrogen in the soil has been around and it still is, it has been the sole contributor of nitrogen application to the soil until artificial fertilizers came in. So even when people used, let's say, entirely manure as this is a source of nitrogen, well, the manure came from animals, so they didn't make it up. They just transformed grass into manure, and then you applied that manure to the soil as a source of different things, including nitrogen. So until, if you look up nitrogen cycle, if you Google it, you'll find one that will include here a picture that shows chimneys and stuff like that, which indicates factories trapping nitrogen from the atmosphere and adding it to the soil. Now, in reality, this natural system on its own here, and I've mentioned this before, but there's no harm repeating certain things just to elaborate the importance of fertilizers. This natural system on its own will only produce food for less than 1/2 of the world population. So if we stop using synthetic nitrogen fertilizers, what are we going to have? We're going to have famine. And this actually happened in Sri Lanka a couple of years ago, when the government dictated that, okay, stop nitrogen fertilizers, go organic. We all love to go organic if we can, but reality stipulates that we won't be able to provide enough food. That's the reality of it. So are we going to go organic and let half of the population of the world starve? Those who cannot afford to use fertilizer, to buy organic, or are we going to use chemical fertilizers? Now, this is a moral question, and I'm not going to give you the answer here. I'm not going to suggest what the answer should be, because some might say that if we keep producing more fertilizers, producing more food, we're encouraging overpopulation. This is not the issue that I'm going to discuss. I'm discussing the fact that we cannot live and produce enough food for 8 billion people without having to use synthetic fertilizers. Now, I have made some rather strong comments about the organic industry, and they're not meant to be derogatory or slanderous or anything. I'm just stating facts. And there are a lot of good things to the organic industry, and I'm going to talk about them, well at least one of them today. A lot of people, may say, so if this guy, Iman, is telling us there's really hardly any difference between organic and non-organic food or conventionally grown food, why is it that organic food tastes better? Yeah, it does taste better, I must say, most of it. The reason why it tastes better is because it's got less nitrogen in it most of the time than conventionally grown crops. Now, as an agronomist who has worked with farmers basically over 5 different continents with all different types of socioeconomics, I can assure you that I have only seen evidence of nitrogen deficiency on conventionally grown crops in poorer countries. In richer countries, especially the West, the problem with nitrogen is not too little. The problem is often too much. So if you apply too much nitrogen fertilizers, what happens is that everything else gets diluted, the crop grows quickly, and it doesn't really get the chance to mature properly, because too much nitrogen will retard maturity. It will also retard things like accumulation of other minerals, and it will give you a higher water content, and it will also produce lower keeping quality of the fruit and the produce in general. So let's say an organically grown lettuce will survive outside the fridge, let's say, for a week. One that is conventionally grown with too much nitrogen, it will barely last a couple of days. It will collapse. And on things like potato, because there's always this balance that we talk about in the world of agronomy, balance between vegetation and the reproductive cycle, because the plant has 2 cycles, the vegetative cycle and the reproductive cycle. If you put too much nitrogen, you're pushing with the vegetative cycle, vegetative growth, and you're decreasing the fruiting cycle. Even with things like potato, the spuds, they're not a fruit, it's a tuber. But if you give potatoes too much nitrogen, they will grow, they will look so fantastically big, but then when you dig them, you'll find very little underneath. And these were problems that were not thought about before fertilizers, as in artificial fertilizers, were introduced, because they didn't have that benchmark. They didn't expect to find these problems. So it was when those artificial fertilizers were introduced that agronomists and growers alike noticed, hang on, there's something wrong here. These are good things, they make plants grow, but we cannot apply too much of them. Because if you apply too much of them, you're upsetting the cycle, you're upsetting the nutritional quality of the crop, and you're having a major reduction in taste qualities. And that's really one of the main reasons why you will notice that organically grown crops will last longer and it will taste better. So let's remember that we are basically applying nitrogen, whether it's in organic form or inorganic form, is to enable the plant to produce amino acids, mainly those essential amino acids that we cannot live without. If we only get those 9 essential amino acids in our diet, we will be able to get the right mixture, because out of these, our bodies will be able to produce the 12, 13 other amino acids that are non-essential. So later on in the course, we will be learning about what crops are going to provide us with those essential amino acids, whether we are eating those crops directly or whether we are using them as feed, because there is very little difference between the need for essential elements between humans and, let's say, livestock, including poultry. But just as a little what shall I say, giveaway here, The crops that I'm going to be focusing on will be primarily legume and other cereal crops that will go hand in hand with these things. Because legumes will provide most of these things out of thin air, literally out of thin air. They will get the nitrogen out of thin air, give it to the bacteria that are living in symbiosis with their root, and they will provide those amino acids, well, most of them. But the ones that they don't produce, you will find them in things like rice, in things like corn, and even in things like, if we want to be practical, because as gardeners, and I'm specifically talking about, gardeners in my area, because I can't talk to anyone and everyone all around the globe, but where we are here, we can grow things like sweet potato, for example. We're not going to be able to grow rice. We can grow corn. If you combine corn with legume, you'll be able to get most of these things. Sweet potato, same thing. Rice, but we can't grow rice, sadly. We don't have the climate, we don't have enough water for it, and many other things that require actually a big setup. It's not easy to grow rice. So I think enough talking about nitrogen as such, but then I just want to mention a few names of fertilizers that are commonly used. You have the ammoniacal fertilizers, which is anything that contains ammonia. So it could be ammonium sulfate, ammonium nitrate, ammonium phosphate. These are the main three ones that are used. And then you have the nitrate fertilizers. The most ancient one of them is the nitrate of Chile, or Chilean nitrate, which is really sodium nitrate. This is not much used anymore. Ammonium nitrate is not much used anymore because it's dangerous, it's an explosive, so it's been put off the market. Instead of ammonium nitrate, now we use urea. But again, urea is one of those things that can easily be misused if you use too much of it. And a lot of these fertilizers, as we shall be discussing later on, can have impurities in them, which give them a bad name. But those impurities, which are mainly, let's say, heavy metals, you also find in your soil. So we have to be realistic, because if a fertilizer has the same amount of heavy metal that I have in my soil, I really shouldn't be worried too much, because whichever way I grow crops, I'm going to get them anyway. Anyway, enough of that, talking about nitrogen, keeping in mind that the main fertilizers of nitrogen that are in use today are that's excluding humus, compost, and these things, and manure. The chemical fertilizers are nitrates or ammonium salts or urea. And we'll be talking more about these later on when we start talking about actually giving recommendations on how to apply these things where and when. Thank you for listening. We'll see you next time.